assure the honourable member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised. To ask the Prime Minister, I'd like some advice, please. What do I say? Oh, they really are panicking, aren't they?
Order. I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is ensuring it goes on forever. Quick question.
Imagine leading a political party that has topped more than 175 opinion polls since the general election, that has 5 elected MPs representing hundreds of thousands of voters, that is consistently polling higher than both Labour and the Conservatives combined, and yet having absolutely zero representation in the House of Lords while parties with fewer MPs somehow manage to have multiple peers. That is a genuinely absurd situation facing Nigel Farage and Reform UK right now, and it has reached a point where even senior Conservatives are calling out the democratic deficit. Lord True, the leader of Conservative peers, has demanded representation for every party in the House of Commons, calling it a sensitive constitutional principle. Farage wrote a very polite letter to Keir Starmer over 3 months ago asking for some representation in the Lords. Nothing massive. Just some acknowledgement that Reform UK exists and has democratic legitimacy, and he did not even get the courtesy of a reply. Not a no, not a maybe, not a we will think about it, but complete radio silence. Farage has now gone on GB News to openly mock Labour for this transparent attempt to exclude Reform from the political establishment, calling the current situation monstrous and suggesting the government is terrified of his party. When even your political opponents are embarrassed enough by your behaviour to call you out, you know you have crossed a line. Quick favour. If you are absolutely fascinated by this democratic farce where the most popular party in Britain according to polls has zero representation in the House of Lords while parties with fewer votes somehow have multiple peers, hit that subscribe button right now. Over 94% of you watching have not subscribed yet. It is completely free. Takes literally 2 seconds, and helps us keep bringing you these moments where the political establishment's hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. Cheers if you did. Now back to the spectacular democratic deficit. Let us start with the basic facts because they are genuinely shocking when you lay them out clearly. Nigel Farage leads Reform UK, a party that has led in more than 175 opinion polls since the general election. That is not a typo. 175 polls. Not a handful. Not a dozen, not even 50, but 175 separate polling surveys showing Reform UK with more support than any other political party in Britain. The party currently has 5 MPs in the House of Commons, which admittedly is a relatively small number but represents a significant breakthrough for a party that only seriously contested the last election. Those 5 MPs were elected by hundreds of thousands of voters who looked at the political options available and decided Reform UK best represented their views and interests. And yet, despite all of that democratic legitimacy, despite leading nearly 200 opinion polls, despite having elected MPs, Reform UK has precisely zero representation in the House of Lords. None. Not a single peer who sits under the Reform banner or who represents their perspective in the upper chamber. Meanwhile, parties with fewer MPs and less electoral support somehow manage to have peers sitting in the Lords. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, has 4 MPs and 2 peers. The Green Party has 4 MPs and 2 peers. Reform UK has 5 MPs and 0 peers. The mathematics simply does not work unless you conclude that there is a deliberate effort to exclude Reform from the establishment structures of British politics. Lord True, the leader of the Conservative peers, has now publicly called out this situation, demanding representation for every party in the House of Commons and describing it as a sensitive constitutional principle. That phrase, sensitive constitutional principle, is diplomatic language for this is really important and you are violating a fundamental norm of how our democracy is supposed to work. Lord True is a Conservative, So you might assume he has no particular love for Nigel Farage or Reform UK, but he is willing to publicly state that Reform deserves representation in the Lords because the alternative is a system where the governing party gets to decide which political movements are allowed into the establishment and which are permanently excluded regardless of their democratic support. Earlier in the year, Farage made what sounds like a perfectly reasonable appeal directly to Keir Starmer. He wrote asking the Prime Minister to hand out peerages to Reform UK alumni to ameliorate the democratic disparity between the Commons and the Lords. That language, ameliorate the democratic disparity, is quite measured and diplomatic. Farage is not demanding dozens of peers or claiming Reform should have equal representation to parties that have been around for over a century. He is simply pointing out that there is a disparity, that Reform has democratic legitimacy through their MPs and polling, and that some representation in the Lords would be appropriate. It is the kind of letter that deserves at least a response, even if that response is a polite no with some explanation of why the government has decided not to grant peerages at this time. But Farage did not get a response. At all. Complete silence. I wrote a very polite letter to Keir Starmer just over 3 months ago. Farage told GB News to say, look, we need some representation. It may not be very big, but some representation. And I could not believe it. I did not even get the courtesy of a reply. That phrase, the courtesy of a reply, is doing a lot of work. Farage is not primarily complaining about being denied peerages. He is complaining about being completely ignored. When the leader of a political party that has 5 MPs and is leading an opinion polls writes to the Prime Minister about a constitutional matter, you would expect at least an acknowledgment that a letter was received and some indication of the government's thinking. The complete silence is insulting and speaks to a level of contempt that goes beyond normal political rivalry. Farage's explanation for why he received no response is politically astute and probably correct. Now I understand it. He said, the government is in trouble. They are terrified of us. In every PMQs, all he seems to talk about is me in generally quite disparaging terms. This is genuine psychological insight into Starmer's behaviour. The Prime Minister does spend a disproportionate amount of time at Prime Minister's questions attacking Farage and Reform UK, which is rather odd given that Reform only has 5 MPs while Conservatives have over 100. If Starmer was being rational about who poses the biggest threat, he would focus on the official opposition. But he keeps returning to Farage, which suggests Farage is right that the government is terrified of Reform's polling numbers and what they might mean for Labour's electoral prospects. The terror is understandable when you look at the polling. Reform UK has stormed ahead of its fellow parliamentarians in almost 200 opinion polls since Starmer became Prime Minister. That is an extraordinary run of polling dominance that suggests not a temporary surge or a protest vote, but a genuine realignment of British politics where a significant portion of voters had concluded that neither Labour nor the Conservatives represent their interests and Reform offers something different that appeals to them. For Labour, which won the last election with around 34% of the vote, the prospect of Reform consolidating support at 25 to 30% or higher is genuinely existential. It threatens to split the anti-Conservative vote in a way that could hand seats back to the Tories or, worse from Labour's perspective, see Reform actually winning seats in Labour heartlands. Farage thanked Lord True for being bigger than just looking at party politics and saying that Reform needs representation and it needs to happen very, very soon. That thanks is pointed because it highlights that Lord True, a Conservative peer, is demonstrating more respect for democratic principles than Keir Starmer, the Labour Prime Minister who presumably believes in democracy and representation. When your political opponents are showing more integrity than you are, it is not a good look. Farage's description of the current situation as monstrous is strong language but arguably justified. A system where parties are systematically excluded from one chamber of parliament based on political convenience rather than democratic legitimacy is genuinely concerning regardless of your views on Reform UK's policies. In the latest list of peerages, Reform UK was missing from the string of unelected appointees from Labour, the Conservatives, and Liberal Democrats. That list is a who's who of establishment figures being rewarded with ermine robes and the ability to shape legislation for life, and Reform UK is nowhere to be seen. Labour recently came under fire for appointing 25 of its own supporters to the upper chamber despite the party repeatedly denouncing the Lords as undemocratic and promising reform. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. Labour says the Lords is undemocratic and needs reforming, then immediately appoints 25 more Labour peers to consolidate their position, while simultaneously refusing to give any representation to a party that is outpolling them in surveys. It is having your cake, eating it, and then refusing to share any crumbs with your political rivals. The comparison with other parties is particularly damning. Parties with fewer MPs in the Commons have managed to secure representation in the Lords. Plaid Cymru has 4 MPs and 2 peers. The Green Party has 4 MPs and 2 peers. Reform UK has 5 MPs and 0 peers. By any reasonable calculation, Reform should have at least 1 or 2 peers if the system was operating on principles of proportionality or even just basic fairness. The only explanation for Reform having 0 representation is that the established parties have collectively decided that Reform is beyond the pale and should be excluded from the political establishment regardless of their democratic support. Lord True's argument for why Reform should have representation is straightforward and compelling. My view is that if Reform wins seats in the House of Commons, they should have seats here, he said. It is a simple principle. If voters elect you to represent them in the Commons, you should have some representation in the Lords. The beauty of this House is its complete freedom, Lord True continued. So any peer here wants to put down an amendment, that amendment must be heard. So having somebody from a party that is represented in the House of Commons to take a detailed part in examination and to put forward that party's point of view, I think is a sensible constitutional principle. That explanation goes to the heart of what the House of Lords is supposed to do in the British constitutional system. The Lord scrutinizes legislation, proposes amendments, brings different perspectives and expertise to bear on government proposals. If Reform UK has no representation in the Lords, there is an entire political perspective that is missing from that scrutiny process. Bills that might have implications for Reform voters or that Reform MPs would want to amend in certain ways go through the Lords without anyone representing that viewpoint. That is a genuine deficit in the legislative process regardless of whether you personally agree with Reform's politics. The political calculation from Labour's perspective is obviously that giving Reform peerages legitimizes them as a permanent part of the political establishment and potentially helps them build infrastructure and credibility that could threaten Labour electorally.